So, this episode is not sponsored by The Fast and the Furious, neither is it sponsored by Dominic Toretto, but this episode is pretty much about family. Well, it's more marriage than family, but I don't know. I feel like that one still kind of worked either way, plus, I've been meaning to use that line for a bit. So, considering that I know it's gonna be long, I'm gonna start with something a little short but sweet. Now, fun fact, homosexuality was still classified as an illness in Sweden in the year 1979. The Swedes protested by calling in sick to work, saying that they were feeling gay. Now, you kind of think about it, back then I feel like that would have made a little bit more sense. I'm guessing people weren't staying as close to the office, so it's not like the boss would drive and check everyone. And also, I feel like that is just the nicest way to find a reason to skip work, that I wouldn't even have recommended it for a protest. I'd have told everyone, you know what, fuck off, just keep it normal. And then you use that like every couple of days when you feel like, you know what, I don't feel so great. Like, I woke up this morning, I looked at my dick and I was like, that's gay, you know?
Get ready for the battle of the sexes.
The only problem with trying that shit right now is that there's technology now, so you can't run away. Then there's working from home, and you know, your boss can pretty much just ask to come and see you. But either way, working from home has kind of made that a very moot thing to do right now. Because you think about it, back in the day, there were no phones that could take selfies and shit. So for me to kind of sell that as a sickness, I'd have to, I don't know, send a picture of me kissing another dude. Of which, by that point, I might as well already start transitioning to that level, because it's not like I'd use the same picture. I'd need to take a bunch of them. So I kind of think about it. Today, in this day and age, such a protest wouldn't work, because there's a bunch of people that work from home. In 1979, it was smart, because there was no technology. People weren't using cameras unless it was for like family photos and shit. So they wouldn't take it that far. And fortunately for the LGBT, of course, they stopped recognizing it as an illness. But unfortunately for us straight people, now we can't use that as an excuse to not go to work. But either way, even though now homosexuality isn't classified as an illness, they still have relationship issues, some of which I still try to resolve with this podcast, which I probably should have started in a more typical fashion, where I start by saying, welcome to Breakdown on West Side, your number one breakdown podcast, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. The man on the mic is a man who is not willing to suck a dick just to miss work. I may not like labor all that much, but the thought of me sucking a dick just so that I can get peace means that it won't be peace, it'll be penis. But that's sort of besides the point. He's a man who has trouble breathing when he realizes that you got that asthma. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denverby. The show is Battle of the Sexes, our weekly love, sex, and relationships show where I get to talk about stuff that does not necessarily relate to dick. Mostly it's usually guy stuff. Sometimes somebody gets pissed, but I usually like to come through with that conclusion. And a massive thank you to each and every one of you that usually reaches out for that feedback. The place to do it at is at Breaktime on West Side on Facebook and on IG. And on Twitter, you can slide into my personal DMs, which is at Bagaka the D. And we usually appreciate all that feedback. Now, I'm gonna be very honest with y'all. I am sort of trying to brush through these bits first because I feel like there's quite a lot to be spoken about today. Now, normally I will say, oh, you know, before I get into the main topic, I need us to talk about something. But the way this episode feels with the stuff I want to talk about, it feels like I have two main topics to discuss, which is a bit weird. So let me sort of just not end up taking too much time and just kind of go into the first bit. Now, there was a video that ended up trending last week on Kenyan Twitter for a bit, and it ended up becoming such an interesting conversation point that radio stations actually sort of picked it up on some of their shows to actually discuss it. Now, it was a video of a Ugandan man with his wife and 3 daughters, and they're all seated in the living room, and the daughters were blasting the father for cheating on the mother repeatedly over the past couple of years. Now, I know this isn't Tweet Street and this came from Twitter, so that's probably the place I should be discussing, but when I was busy recording for Tweet Street, this story hadn't hit as big. I'd already heard it and I thought it was one of those pass and go things, but it actually ended up lingering a little bit afterwards. And also, even though I would have re-recorded this bit, I feel like it just wouldn't have suited the theme of last week's episode. But anyways, that aside, I can't exactly play the audio from the video. One, because it's jumbled up, and two, it's 5 minutes 32 seconds long. So what I've done is I've put a link to the Twitter post which had the video. Hopefully it shouldn't have been deleted, but if it is, you can always reach out to me and I'll send it to you. So these three daughters, because they sounded like they were all roughly within their teens, if one of them isn't a little past it, they all sort of found out through a little bit of investigation over time that their father was cheating on their mother quite a bit and had been doing so for quite a number of years. And the thing is, the way they confronted it, sitting the father on one side, the mom on the other side, and they're pretty much blasting the father, busy talking about, oh, how could you have fucked up this much? Oh, how dare you do this to our mother? Oh, you're dead to me, blah, blah, blah. Like, I listened to that shit, and I'm not gonna lie, it was a little bit cringe, because watching the dad just sit there and take all of that was a little bit hard to watch. Now, I remember when I first saw the video, it was posted up on some WhatsApp group, and people were busy talking about how so-and-so is in the wrong. And hell, it was actually the same exact thing on Twitter, because people were busy talking about who's in the wrong. But in my head, I was busy thinking to myself that everyone there has fucked up royally. Because the way I look at it, especially as someone who's grown up in Kenya, especially as someone who's sort of seen how Ugandans are sort of brought up and the kind of cultural upbringing they have and the respect they have, like, everyone there fucked up royally, including the mother who just sat and watched all of that shit happen. Like, these kids were actually casting and showing the proof, the screenshots, the receipts and everything on their TV. Like, they were casting it from their phones onto the TV. And my issue with all of that actually stems from the fact that in as much as those kids are a product of the relationship of the marriage of these two individuals, it does not mean that they are a part of that relationship as shareholders in any way whatsoever. And I'll explain that in a little bit, because I believe that because these kids were sort of brought up in the States, because this is a Ugandan family in the US of A, it actually does kind of lend to how it is that they behaved. Because if it was in Uganda, or if they had been brought up in Uganda for a while, I don't think they'd have blown up like this, because Ugandan culture is very big on respect. In the US, as long as you can make enough noise when you realize that something's wrong and you sound good enough, most people usually tend to think that it's perfectly okay to do that. But I can be corrected on that, but for the most part, that's kind of the biggest differentiating factor, especially in relation to the story. Then also there's the fact that this is their father. Like, this is the man that ensured that they came into this world, or at least this is the man that brought them into the world, just the same way the mom is the woman that brought them into this world as well. If it wasn't for either one of them, they wouldn't really exist per se. So to not respect them, not just from a Christian perspective, but from an African one, is a huge disservice to the parents. And that's why I feel like the mom sort of kind of fucked up. And I'll explain it with a quick short story that my late professor kind of gave us back in the day about his family. Now, he spoke about how his mom raised him and his brothers and sisters very, very well. And she went and she gave her all. She used to put in the work. She used to make sure they were ready for school and everything. She used to encourage them. But the dad was a drunk. He was a mad alcoholic, and the guy was absolutely useless. And whenever he'd actually try to sort of point out how useless he is, the mom would always tell him no. And whenever the kids would try to say something ill about him, she would actually beat the shits out of them. And she would say, whatever it is that you might feel about your father, whatever it is that he might have done or not done to me, at the end of the day, he is your father and you must respect him at all times. And that was something that he said which sort of stuck with me for quite a bit. Now, back to the original bits and what he did. Yes, I do not endorse cheating, but I do not like the fact that they brought it out that way. And some people might come out and they're like, oh, it was necessary. Oh, what would you rather have them do? Just sit on that information, blah, blah, blah. No. I believe that the best course of action would have probably been them giving all of that information to the mom and then letting the mom do with it as she pleased. Because one thing that a lot of people don't know, especially kids living in today's day and age, a lot of couples, a lot of marriages, a lot of relationships, you find that they have some said or unsaid agreements that exist. And some of those agreements will allow for the man, or maybe even the woman, or both of them even, to go outside of the marriage in the name of sexual satisfaction. And as long as there is respect that is maintained, as long as, it doesn't really come to light, y'all are good. And this arrangement can sometimes be said and also sometimes be unsaid. Now, the said ones, those ones are a lot easy to decipher, and in some cases you can call it an open or a half-open relationship of sorts. Now, the unsaid ones are the ones that are a little bit trickier when it comes to the couple that's involved. Now, the reason why I'm saying that it's unsaid is because sometimes you will find the wife of the man will not try and find out if the man is cheating, and will willfully be ignorant of the fact that this guy could possibly be sleeping outside with some other woman. And not unless if someone points it out, they know very well that this man could be screwing other babes, but they don't try and find out, maybe because they're happy with the kind of life that they have with this guy, or they want to maintain some level of plausible deniability when this guy is sort of being confronted because of a cheating scandal. Now, I know of stories of side chicks who've been beaten up, of dudes that have pretty much ended up dropping a side chick because of this shit, because you find that the side chick is reaching out to the wife, to the main chick, to the girlfriend and shit, and they're busy saying, oh, your man is screwing me, blah, blah, blah. And this woman ends up going to go and complain and say, why is your woman contacting me and trying to tell me about what you're doing? It's not like the guy and his wife or his woman have agreed on what's supposed to happen. The woman is just reaching out to this guy and saying, I do not like the fact that this babe is reaching out to me. And a lot of side chicks have actually been dropped that way. So back to the story, you do not know if this man and this wife had some sort of unsaid arrangement where, as long as this guy is not bringing any new kids from another woman home, as long as he does not disrespect the wife, as long as he treats the kids well and they do not lack and he keeps his shit private, he can probably do whatever it is that he wants to do. They could have had some sort of arrangement of that sort that said, or the woman might have just figured, you know what, he treats me good, the kids are well taken care of, I don't need to bother him, and sort of left that shit unsaid. But now the kids have sort of unsettled all of that. And the unfortunate thing is, this is a very complex relationship thing that a lot of people don't know about. And as long as the kids do not know about this sort of arrangement, because it breaks the ideal version of monogamy, which they should be striving for by all means, then the man can continue banging as many other babes that he wants without anyone else knowing, provided he keeps that shit private. Now, the unfortunate thing about it is this guy has not only been quote-unquote caught, but he's been caught by his kids. And trying to explain that to your own daughters as a woman is going to be very, very hard to do, so you probably won't say jack shit about it. But all in all, I still feel like everyone sort of handled this shit fairly poorly. That information should have been taken to the woman of the house so that she can decide what it is that she wants to do. Because in some cases, they might actually have chosen to stay, or she might have let it slide, and everything would have gone on perfectly, provided that they'd have been told to respect their father and keep the shit in the relationship with the people who are in that relationship. But all in all, I might be wrong about this shit. I'd like your thoughts on it. But for now, I'm gonna move it on to our main topic of today. And before I get to that, ladies and gentlemen, do you ever wish you or your man's beard game went up? Do you ever dream of feeling a full beard? Do you simply want a beard that looks and smells good? If you said yes to some or all of the above, Accentu is the experience for you or your man. Their amazing beard oil is set to revolutionize the market through the use of tested and approved organic ingredients that will make the No Shave November squad not only look ruggedly appealing, but also smell cool and dominant. Get your first bottle for 15% off with their No Shave November deal through the link in the description below, and allow you or your man's beard to finally say thank you. Now, back to the episode. Now, while I was on Twitter last week on Friday, I realized that marriage was actually trending on Kenyan Twitter for some reason. So when I went and I checked it, and yes, I know this isn't Tweet Street, but just bear with me on this one. When I went and I checked, I actually realized it was mostly because people were busy talking about this post that the Nation website had put up, where they were talking about how, according to a recent report by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, most Kenyan men are actually avoiding marriage as we speak. So I'm gonna read bits of the article for you just because I don't feel like reading the entire thing, but the article reads, and I quote, "About half of Kenyan men are increasingly reaching old age without ever tying the knot in their lifetime," indicates the report launched on November the 2nd, 2022 by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. According to the report, which provided insight to the 2019 census, the number of men who are aging without ever settling down is higher compared to spinsters in the country. Moreover, the age for settling down among men has also increased gradually over the past decade. For instance, the average age of men at marriage in the 1980s was 25 years compared to the current age of 29 years, which means that men are waiting longer before making the lifetime commitment. The average age for marriage in the country for women has also increased to 25 years from 21 years in the 1980s. Now, the article goes all the way down and at some point says, and I quote, "Increase in the number of men and women in the country avoiding or delaying getting hitched, as well as delaying childbirth and reducing the number of children, could be attributed to religious doctrines, harsh economic times, education pursuits, and personal resolutions." End quote. Now, I just sort of wanted to quote the bits that actually related to men not getting married as such, because I feel like that one is something that I can discuss. There was the whole women bit and them not wanting to get kids and shit, but I feel like that's a different story for a different set of people. Now, the interesting thing that I found was their supposed reasons for why it is that people aren't getting married. Now, I know for women, you can bring in the educational pursuits because actually statistically, women that are more educated tend to marry later, and I also think tend to have fewer kids, if kids at all. So that one I can sort of understand, but it's not like I've had a guy busy saying, you know what, I'm delaying marriage because I want to pursue my PhD. That one I haven't heard of it though. The religious doctrines, that one, it feels like it should be a discussion on its own somewhere else, because I've never heard a man saying that he's not going to get married because of his faith. I feel like people who are more religious will probably end up getting married much sooner than those of us that aren't as religious, just mostly because the kind of circles that they chill with are fairly small and they end up zoning on the person they want to be with, and they end up chilling in those circles and they can get married very quickly. But that's sort of besides the point. The other two are the ones that I feel are the most realistic as of right now, of which, first of all, even before I get to the economic times and personal resolutions, these guys are talking about how apparently the average age of getting married has gone up to 29. Like, I feel like it's way higher than that. Maybe there's some person in the village that wants to get married at 19, maybe he's on that's pulling the average back, but I feel like for men it's gone beyond 30 actually. 30 is when they start contemplating getting married nowadays, and hell, I know guys that are even in their early to mid 20s that are thinking of not getting married until they're 40. But that's sort of besides the point. Now, the two reasons, which are harsh economic times and personal resolutions, are probably what I'd say out of the four reasons that these guys have given can actually be true determinants of whether men want to get married or not, because guys are expected to be providers and guys are expected to be resourceful. So if you're under harsh economic times, it means that there's a lot fewer guys that actually have really good money that they'd probably get married with, or at least that they'd feel firm and stable enough financially that they can get married. Even though when you think about it practically, if both people, male and female, were to come together to actually get married and they'd actually choose to, share the costs between themselves, they'd actually be in a much better position to actually do better economically, because if they can get a joint account, they'll only be taxed once, not twice. Then on top of that, because they stay in the same house, they can cut a lot of those costs down and they can actually end up having a more financially fulfilled life, if you were to think about it in sort of the same way a lot of our parents back in the day sort of looked at it. But today, that's not necessarily the case. Although I don't even feel like that's the main reason why guys aren't choosing to get married, because there's a lot of broke guys that get married. There's a lot of guys that do not make a lot of money that desire to get married, which is why I'd much rather stick to the personal resolution bits, and that one I feel takes the cake in terms of its importance in this entire thing. Because when you kind of think about it, guys nowadays are deciding not to get married, and it's a personal decision, not particularly driven by some sort of religious doctrine or whether they're trying to pursue a master's or a PhD. Like, it's mostly a case of them making that personal decision based off of the information that they get on other things. And it's mostly a case of the environment and the stories that they get from bits of the environment that they're in. And that's something that affects Nairobi guys quite a lot. And I'm going to explain this using an explanation that I gave on Tweet Street. I think it was about 2 weeks ago in relation to this. Why it is that guys aren't trying to get married nowadays. And the main reason is the visible benefits of marriage that we were all promised, that we've sort of always wanted. Either we're not getting them with the current crop of babes that are out there, or we can get them without really having to make that big of a commitment. And as far as reasons go, I feel like that's actually the main reason. Like, you could literally just unplug from the podcast at this point and you'd still be good. But if you want to get the full explanation as to it, then by all means stick around. Now, when you look at what we generally look for in marriage, or at least the visible benefits that we're looking for in marriage as guys that are, unmarried, it's pretty much down to about 3 main things. 1 is legacy, or, your ability to give me kids. 2 is loyalty. And 3 is support. Now, the thing is, from the many stories that we hear out here nowadays for a lot of Nairobi guys and Nairobi gals, it doesn't look like that's what you're actually getting from the woman nowadays. So why should I bother getting married? Because you think about it, in terms of legacy, you don't necessarily have to be married to the woman to give her a kid. Like, nowadays, there's dudes that are busy saying, get her pregnant, then decide if you want to settle down with her or not, which is very destructive, and I don't like that. But people do that. There's guys that'll pretty much get a babe pregnant, and because they do not see some sort of long-term future with them, they just decide not to marry them, or they just decide to co-parent them for one reason or another. Then also, you kind of think about it, nowadays there's a lot of babes that are pretty much trapping guys with kids that aren't even there. So when you're having a kid, or at least when a baby is having your kid, you're not entirely sure if that kid is even yours. So there's that fear that exists. Then you look at the case of loyalty, babes nowadays are cheating just as much as dudes are, even though it was considered to be mostly a dude thing. Ever since women decided whatever a man can do, a woman can do better, it's kind of turned things around on the whole cheating game. And it's worse with babes when they cheat. With dudes, there's a trail. With babes, as long as they decide to clean up just a little bit, us guys won't ever find shit out. And that shit definitely hurts a lot of guys. Plus also, you kind of think about it, if you end up going ahead, you pay dowry, you end up spending money on a wedding just for your babe to be screwed by some random dude that's never paid for shit for her at any point in her life, then it actually does seem like you as the married man are getting the raw deal. Then you look at support, which used to be assured way back in the day but isn't today, and you look at the number of stories of people who were left by their wives, their girlfriends, their fiancés during COVID because times got tough, and you actually start to ask yourself if it was worth it, if she's just going to leave you when things get tough. Because the whole in sickness and in health, for richer for poorer, doesn't really seem like it's a real thing. It's just a thing that babes say nowadays so that they can get the vows over and done with. So when that's sort of out there, do you really think that there's that many guys that would still look at the idea of marriage with all of that shit and be like, yep, that's definitely something I want to go for? Then on top of that, we have the anti-feminist movement, which is filled with guys that talk a lot of shit about babes. And the problem is, a lot of these guys are some of the loudest ones, and they're the ones that preach a lot of this shit that's very anti-marriage. Because you have the likes of Amerix that will talk about how, go get her pregnant and decide if you want to settle down with her. About how marriage itself is a scam, or at least they'll talk about how monogamy is a scam of some sort. And at some point they'll pretty much be like, work on yourself. But a lot of the time they're like, if she has tattoos, drop that bitch. If she does this, drop that babe. If she wants to go on a girl's night out, drop her immediately. And do not tolerate ABCD, of which a lot of ABCD is stuff that babes do today, and it's just normal for them. But the thing is, because these guys have spoken so ill of marriage and they've spoken so ill about the babes right now, it becomes harder for most guys to think about it and be like, I'd actually want to get married. Which sort of brings me to the next side of all of this. Are we really sure that all of this is a reality for all of us? Or is this something that affects a very small subset or small pockets of a lot of us? Because that's what I'd actually like to argue out, because the biggest problem that we have right now is we're taking a couple of people's stories and a couple of people's experiences here and there, and we're basing it as the general truth for everyone out there, which isn't entirely the case. And I can explain that with a very simple analogy of how loud people end up making other people think that what they go through, everyone else goes through. So take for example, you have a group of about 6 women. Out of those 6, there's one babe that's dating 5 guys simultaneously, and all of these guys are busy spending money on her. One covers the rent, one does the shopping, one gives her money to go out, another one is just great for dick, and the other one is one that the parents know that she's sort of having a thing with. So she's having a thing with 5 different dudes all at the same time. So these 5 other babes will go and talk to, say, 2-3 other guys at a random day, and they'll be like, oh, we know this chick, there's this friend of mine who does ABCD with all of these guys. So you guys be careful, some babes out here are moving mad. Now, these guys will go and talk to, say, 3 guys each, and they'll all start to talk about how, oh, you know, there's all of this shit that babes are doing nowadays, as referenced by this one particular story. Now, this is one babe who's doing that. 5 babes have said that, and it's been told to 2 dudes each. That's about 10 dudes, and you multiply that by the other 3 dudes, now that's about 30 people. Now, say out of that 30, 10 or even 15 of them are hopping onto Twitter, and they're getting on various posts that they all resonate with, because Twitter is a place of circles, and they're all talking about how babes cheat like this, and they're all referencing one story. Now, just like that, it's gonna sound like there's like 50 babes out there that are definitely cheating. And if you can think that there's 50 babes out there, then you'll assume that it might be the same for 500 or 5,000 or 500,000. And at the end of the day, you find that a case of one babe has not only influenced, say, maybe 5 other babes to go and do the same thing, aka cheat, but it's also influenced the thought process of about 50 or 100 guys that apparently babes out here cheat a lot. And as such, you end up with a situation where guys are like, you know what, you can't trust babes nowadays. These babes, you know, they're not the type to be married, they're not good quality, the kid might not be yours, and they're definitely not as supportive. But if you find that, say, out of those 6 babes, there's one that cheats, that influences another 2 to cheat, but the other 3 are completely loyal, that becomes an issue, because you have 3 loyal babes that are going to be looked at as potential bad apples. Now that ends up happening for a lot of babes out here, because when you're hearing about 100 stories, 5,000 other babes are gonna be looked at as bad quality, because the 100 are somewhere among them. And yes, maybe 1,000 of those babes might be shit, but there's another 4,000 that are definitely good quality, amazing babes, which unfortunately for most of us is actually the current reality, regardless of whether you're looking at it as men or as women. A lot of us are being considered as this majority of people that are absolute shit. Which brings me to the conclusion of this very long episode. In this current age where there's a lot of social media talk and people are busy talking about their experiences and other experiences, and radio shows are busy talking about sex all the live long day and how people are cheating and shit, it's very hard to see where good quality is, and it's very easy to assume that everyone is absolutely shit quality. But the reality of it is, if you decide to base your conclusions based off of other people's experiences and stories and rumors of other people's experiences, then you're probably going to end up as a very lonely person. Which is why I'll tell you, in as much as yes, there are a lot of shit babes, you should probably try and take a shot with a couple of babes here and there, because in as much as there's a lot of shit ones, there's some good ones that are definitely misunderstood. Either way, the current reality is that a lot of guys don't want to get married, and it should be a little bit scary for some people, but all in all, we just hope that most guys decide to give more shots to a lot of babes out here, because there is definitely some good out here. Although, then again, I might be wrong about all of this shit, so I want your thoughts on this. The DMs are open on IG, on Facebook, it is at Breaktime, on Westside, on Twitter, it is at Bagaka the D. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.